My fingers smelled like curry as I watched one small mongrel humping another in a grove of trees off Jingmilu. Her face was placid as she braced herself and watched the traffic go by. In the taxi, I placed my hands on my lap and felt my stillness. I placed one hand over the other and that hand over my device. I stroked my device and thought about the devastation of nations.
Welcome, gentle listener. This is an episode that has been in the making for far, far too long. But hopefully, Fortuna's wheel has spun in such a way that you are listening to it now. My guest today is the poet Jennifer Fossenbell. She's published in Black Warrior Review, The Volta, Alluvium, So-and-So Poetry, and many other magazines and journals. She's been an editor of Spittoon Literary Magazine, and also for several collections of Vietnamese poetry. She has an MFA from the University of Minnesota, and she lives in Denver, Colorado. In this episode, she'll read from an as-of-yet unpublished collection of poems titled Commuter, that center around her experience of finding herself in the situation of being a pregnant American woman living in Beijing, China. One of the things I really appreciate about these poems is that she isn't saccharine about pregnancy. It's a human experience, not some sentimental Hallmark crap about motherhood. And in fact, this may be the first episode where I click the little box as I publish that says explicit. Not clean, explicit. Listen carefully and you will hear a dirty word somewhere in one of her poems. Whether a single use of the term motherfucker makes an episode explicit, well, now two uses, I don't know. Then the other thing I particularly enjoy is that I lived in Beijing during an overlapping period of time, so I can concretely imagine some of the places and situations she describes. I don't think it's necessary to enjoy the poems, but in case you're not familiar with Beijing, as many humans of Earth are not, Jingmilu is just a big dumb road connecting the airport to the city. Lots of cars, lots of concrete, lots of traffic. The kind of highway that seems to go on forever. Where if you find yourself stuck in the back of a taxi, you may find yourself in an interior contemplative space if you're that sort of person. Another location she references in these poems is Shine City. Shine City is a shopping center on the outskirts of Beijing. For hundreds, thousands of years, stretching back through the dynasties, it was just farmland. I'm kind of reminded of this passage in The Good Earth by Pearl S. Buck, which I can't find the book on my bookshelf right now, and I'm a little lazy, but as I recall, the protagonist finds a fragment of maybe bone or an old tool, a broken old tool or something in the land, and it's the relic of a peasant farmer who lived the same life but maybe centuries before him, repeating the same cycle of existence. So it's like that kind of farmland, except blink your eyes and now there is a gigantic shopping complex complete with name brand stores, holiday displays set up as selfie backdrops, fashionable nouveau riche, flashing signs, expensive cars stuck in traffic. So that's Shine City. Now, usually on the podcast, we listen to all the writing first, and then I ask a series of questions. But a foolish consistency being the hobgoblin of little minds, this time I did differently. Chatting about each poem right after it was read just felt more natural in this instance, and I think it made the questions fresher too. So feel free to let me know which format you like better. All right, let's fire it up. Hear the first poem.
Okay, all right. So this is It's not about the man, it's about the circumstances surrounding the man. My fingers smelled like curry as I watched one small mongrel humping another in a grove of trees off Jingmilu. Her face was placid as she braced herself and watched the traffic go by. In the taxi, I placed my hands on my lap and felt my stillness. I placed one hand over the other and that hand over my device. I stroked my device and thought about the devastation of nations. I thought about that small dog's penis and questions of consent. I thought about the differences between the taxi driver and me. I resisted the urge to lift my fingers to my nose, take a whiff of what I had for lunch. I thought about the phrase, a sense of propriety, mine and his, as he glanced at me in the mirror. I thought about passivity, mine and the dog's. And I thought about pride, mine and the nation's. I thought about what we mean when we say exotic. Millions of my fellow countrymen are exotic to me now. And whether exotic or erotic are reciprocal relationships. I looked out the window into clusters of men inside the groves of trees and thought about what to do about the devastation, how to gather myself into a small force and apply it somewhere useful, how to bloody and salve, how to lay down, how not to lie down, how to resist the too quick unburdening. It has to be personal. I looked at my screen and said it out loud. It has to be personal. The taxi driver glanced up, jerked his chin to one side when he saw I wasn't talking on the phone, embarrassed by my exotic disclosure. This is just a start, I said to his eyes in the rearview mirror.
So in this poem, it's not about the man. You have this line, what to do about the devastation. And I have this image of you scrolling through alarming news stories from the USA while you're just sitting in the back of a Beijing taxi cab killing time along the Jingmilu. What was the specific thing that you were reacting to? What was the devastation?
Well, this is kind of uncanny in a way because it's come full circle. This poem sort of felt like ancient history a year ago, but now it's come back around to being sort of current events because this was written shortly after the first time Trump was elected. And that's the only time I'll say that name because it's the man that it's not about. And I was in Beijing when that happened, and I was grappling with events from my own country, but feeling very distant from that, obviously geographically, but in other ways too, emotionally. And so obviously at this moment in time, it's an interesting feeling of like coming full circle. And like, if you wait long enough, what's old is new again. So yeah, I was reading the news. Everything was developing similar to how it is right now, towards a new administration that I was very anxious about and very concerned about the effects that were going to trickle down onto other communities of people in my own country and other nations. So that's kind of what that was around.
And it can be strange to be outside of your country at a time like this, as you were saying, feeling so kind of disconnected, and people from, I guess, Beijing in this case, or wherever you happen to be, want to talk about it and engage with it, can be a very odd thing.
Yeah, It was very surreal, which is a running theme in a lot of the poems that I wrote in those years living in Beijing. A lot of that experience was surreal for me. I did feel, and at that moment in time in particular that poem came out of, I was feeling incredibly isolated in a lot of ways. But there was also a certain, I don't know, almost a sense of power and potential that I think came through, and that it was one of those cool things where I kind of wrote it into being. I didn't feel how that potential was there until I was writing it, until I was narrating that moment.
What do you mean power and potential? Could you explain that a bit more?
Well, the moment in the poem where there's a kind of a shift to thinking about what to do, how to become a small force and apply it somewhere useful. So, kind of a call to action. Circumstances driving one to start to think about what one can do in the face of larger global and political devastation.
All right. Should we move to the next poem?
Oh, sure. So, the next one I'm going to read is Face Obsessed. A million pixels lit in 2 million eyes. This is Shine City, where all the people are. Plain in full bling on the sleeve of a jacket. A clown's face embossed in gold on the back. The glamour of passing through. Canned station music in my head all night. The price we pay for moving forward. This is a transfer station. I see no room to enter. Then the pusher, with her uniform and shield, presses 4 men in at my back, applies pressure to the masses like a wall of bodies in a land of walls, yet not a wall, a proliferation, bricks with faces. Now I understand how serial settles. The train lurches and space opens between bodies to be filled instantly by bodies sifting tighter. I think how every face is distinct, but no face is real, or all of us have the same face, that petite firefighter with pink lipstick on the poster. The key is to slide into the inner chamber, another dimension, or get stuck in the interdoor vortex and agitate at every stop like laundry. They call the ultrasound 4D, the fourth dimension being interiority. All of us have the same face, the mad cartoon pig on a swine flu PSA. Please get ready for your arrival. It's astounding how seldom you smell a fart, surrounded as we are in this container by so many bowels, traveling amid hundreds of armpits and assholes, spleens, wrists and stomachs, nostrils and eyebrows, and not one of them gives up their seat. My belly is hidden under my coat. There's a woman standing in spike heels. How I ache looking at her. The press of creation grows less tolerable by the week. Meow meow sequined on the sleeve of a jacket. How very close is communicability to commuting. We are transmitted across the city every morning, crossing a dozen lines, some of them twice. I memorize characters by sight and sound. None of the faces look the same, but we all have the same face. Look upon these divine tidings of comfort, green platform souls, a single padded seat. A face appears like a satellite image of a far planet. We read the surface for signs of life, a familiar landform, a mouth, a miracle, a nose, alien features inside me, a face that is his face. Now he is a he. I guess he might be real after all. If we can see him, we might reach him, might arrive at him one day.
I like the juxtaposition of um, the face of this baby or this fetus in an ultrasound. You know,
Mm-hmm.
they're moving the little thing around, and you're trying to look at it and visually make it into
Mm-hmm.
like a human that will become like your loved one, and
Mm-hmm.
the juxtaposition of that with all of these commuters on the Beijing subway, and maybe the way when you're surrounded by so many people and it's so overwhelming and people are getting on and off and the way faces blend together. But then
Absolutely.
we know each other by our faces, right?
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. This was so. I wrote a lot of subway poems. I just sort of collectively refer to them as subway poems. In about a 2 year period that I was commuting back and forth across Beijing on the subway every day to work in an office, and it was about an hour plus, about an hour and quarter commute each way, and that was such a radical experience for me to go through during pregnancy. There was just a really interesting overlay of the physicality of that experience, of being just surrounded, as you said, by that many bodies in such a tight space, which I think is not necessarily specific to Beijing at all. I think it's very much like anybody who's ridden the subway regularly in a megacity can probably relate to that.
Any megacity. And I don't know about you, but like I grew up in a small town. And so sometimes when I'm in, like now I'm in Bangkok before I lived in Beijing, and sometimes I just look at the sea of faces and it's like, how how can everybody be different from each other? How can there be this many
Right.
humans?
Yeah. Yeah. And similar to you, I mean, I grew up in a medium size, like a college town. So by those standards, definitely a small town. And then I had a couple experiences of living in these massive cities in Hanoi several years prior, and then in Beijing. But Beijing was the winner of like biggest city I ever lived in, and it was mind-boggling, and I kind of loved it. I loved that flow of humanity. I loved being in it and part of it. I mean, maybe not every moment, when it was sometimes very uncomfortable, especially as I refer to in that poem, as I got larger with pregnancy, it became really increasingly challenging to be on the subway and often standing up for an hour and squeezed in and just shoved and nudged. But yeah, there was that, of course, the element of the face. The face comes through a lot. I would just spend this time. It was also almost like meditative time every single day, just watching people's faces, just looking at faces, and then having this interesting kind of meditation on this face inside of me that I could barely see that was developing.
With the face that is inside you and all the faces around you, or that there's this element that it's like a Russian doll or something, where there's this little human inside you, and then there's you, and then and then you're inside this subway car, and then you're also inside uh, a larger culture.
Yep. Yeah, and I mean, and I think, well, it's a good segue into the next poem I was going to read, but that idea of encircling and these kind of layers of being surrounded but almost like encapsulated is definitely something that also followed me through a lot of these poems that I wrote during that period of time. And so again, part of, I think, thematically that had to do with being a mother, but also living in a large city where you tend to live life in these little compartments. You're always kind of moving from one little compartment to another, and often they're nested. Right, you're in a room in a big apartment block, which is in an entire compound of apartment blocks, which is in a district, and so on and so on and so on. So that kind of thinking like followed me a lot, and I think even was borrowing from the the graphic, like, well, the nature of the characters of Chinese, to me, visually like mimicked this kind of these blocks basically, and the building of blocks.
Hmm. Okay, let's hear the next one you were going to read then.
Yeah. All right. This is a God dream. I am going to actually, Deva, if you don't mind, I'm going to describe a little bit the layout of this poem because obviously I can't show it to people who are just listening, but I think the concrete form of it on the page is kind of significant to this one, because it's basically a block of text with a hole, a rectangular hole in the middle of it, which has a smaller block of text inside of that, in a smaller font. So I'm gonna there's a visual cue in the poem that kind of points to where you insert that interior component. So for reading this out loud, I'm gonna cue that insertion point by using the word interior, and then I'll say the word exterior when we go back to the larger, because it basically like happens in the middle. So hopefully that makes sense. This is a God dream. 6 months in and getting bigger and so sentimental. Not just weeping, but the shudder huff, the thing my dad does when overcome listening to Simon and Garfunkel. I see his young face from the past vividly, with the percussion from my lips. Such a tiny sound, like the smallest hurting, like how much the soul can remember of God, wrapped in the starry womb and kicking, hurtling through the dark, desperate to go through it. Interior. There's a foreign immigrant in my midst. B said, how weird to have not me inside of me. And it is. The most private invasion, by invitation, othering through intimacy. We are concentric peoples, my sweet amoeba. Exterior. You are not yet sweet. You are an unripe fruit. So far, you have only a mass that is your own, some sensations, a primal cellular intent. Your minute need machine thrums near my liver. But yes, you are mine, as much as my body is, or not at all. You can make yourself visible after lunch if anyone is watching. They spy a small fish flopping in a water bag. Comments like future soccer player, like already a little bruiser, or you're positively glowing. Listen, every one of us starts with a bruise, and I'm not glowing, I'm exploding, motherfucker. Not even born, my babe, and already the world stacks narratives around you. Us. We live inside their walls every day, in their balloons. I am Lao Wai and Yun Fu on the metro. Neither of us can be invisible anymore. A lady shoots a selfie with me in it, behind her. I look straight at the camera. I see you. I will be seen, seeing, being seen. After work on the platform, small screens flicker in the corner of my eye, mimic the approaching train, or a tear, or the glint of this first, utterly untranslatable fact that we begin encircled and end encircling.
That encircling or concentric element, which you talked about before as like little compartments, like a room inside an apartment building, inside an apartment block, inside a city, inside a country, or relating it to Chinese characters. But then in this poem, it's also narratives that circled inside this and inside that and inside the other.
That's absolutely that stacking of narratives. It's again that same Russian doll effect.
As a parent, not as a mother, of course, but as a parent, I also noticed that when my, uh, like around the birth of my daughter, about just like a small things, but like at first I was convinced that like she doesn't have to have pink stuff. Girls don't have to have pink, and boys don't have to have blue. Like, don't get her a bunch of pink stuff. But people would just do it anyway, or, like, oh, but this is so cute. And this, I don't know, this sort of thing just begins to form around you, um, without, and you can't really do anything about it. And then there's like maybe a larger narrative around that and around that.
There was a little bit of that there for sure. The like the world stacks narratives around us. Very much, I was super sensitive at that time. I think I was even more sensitive to this going through pregnancy in Beijing compared to the when I went through pregnancy in the United States the first time, living in Minnesota. But in China, especially working in the office where I worked, like I was the only foreigner in the office, so all my Chinese colleagues,
Guessing they were very no nonsense about telling you what you should and shouldn't do,
they
kind of
had
thing.
many opinions. They had many opinions about what I should do and not do, and what's proper and correct. And from a cultural standpoint, that's cool. It was enlightening. I learned a lot, and it was neat to be treated. I did in a way. I felt embraced by that experience, because I kind of felt like all these ladies were sort of taking me in, to their fold a little bit, like treating me like one of their own in the sense of being a woman, right? And so even though I was an outsider, I felt like one of them in that sense of being, because many of them were mothers, and so I felt cared for, and that. But then there was also this sense of defiance, this sense of not wanting to be told what it means to have a boy, what it means to be pregnant, what it means to even be a mother. All those formulaic narratives that are fed to us, that can influence our sense of ourselves and identity.
Something else that I was wondering about with this poem, and with like a lot of the poems in this collection have like a concrete or a visual element. At what point does that come in? Do you write the poem and then arrange the words, or does it all kind of blend together, or do you think of a shape first, or how do you approach it?
Oh, that's a really great question. I would say that usually the language comes first. Um, the lines, the phrases, the images, they often just come out in kind of a blob or a rush, of impressions or associations. And then, but the shape, the concrete shape for those poems that have more of a shape, beyond just like standard lines, that typically came in pretty early in the editing process. So, like when I would go to I would take my initial writings, which I typically don't consider a poem quite yet, and I would go to start shaping that into a poem. Then usually the visual shape on the page will emerge kind of right away as I'm working with that language, digging more into those themes and ideas, and that just kind of usually emerges when it does emerge. It kind of happens at that point in time.
Well, shall we move to the next one?
Okay, so the last poem I'll share, if we think of this as a very miniature arc of pregnancy being one of the narrative elements, then this will get us to the point of post pregnancy. So I'm going to share this one called "The Weather Henceforth." Locusts rub against the day's heat like a feeble nerve, chafe the abrasion open and opener till it oozes into the mewling of a newborn on the sofa, on a pillow, on my lap. My short list of ways Missouri is like China. A joke, but not. How is a high rise like a pig farm? I'm far away from everything but you, baby. We are animals seeking comfort in one another because it hurts to be this new. It's true, I've seen a Midwestern storm or two here. A force so mean it must be sentient, warping heaven and earth over Wangjing, the florid heart of Aozhou Kangdu, laid out purple-green and drenched, quenched but gasping for breath, the sky bearing down, waters breaking, tearing out her own roots, bending all that lives and stands outside this picture window. The punchline of the joke, measured feeds, the surrender of all bodies to sky. As if weather was made of foreseen need, and it was yours, my babe, wholly yours.
So, I just recently read this one, and then I did two quick Google searches afterwards. The first one was Aozhou Kongdu, which I guess is like um, an apartment complex, a housing complex in Beijing. Is that right?
That's right, yeah.
Uh huh.
So that's where I was living at the time. Yeah, that was
Okay.
home.
Uh huh. Does it have an English name like Australian something or other? Or
Yeah, the English translation, anywhere that I did see it translated, was just Australia Kongdu. So
hmm.
whatever Kongdu is, I never quite knew, but it just got translated, or it just got transliterated kind of straight across, as a name, almost just like a name. But
uh,
Aojo is Australia, so it was Australia Kongdu.
because these apartment complexes in Beijing often have kind of interesting English language names that may have
Yeah.
nothing to do with their Chinese names. Or, I lived in
Oh, right.
Capital
Absolutely.
Paradise for a long time, and
Yep. Yep.
you
Yep.
say Capital Paradise, and Chinese people don't know what you're talking about because
Uh
it's
huh.
actually Mingdu Yuan or whatever.
Right. Right. Yeah.
Um,
And it's interesting. Like, I don't know why that. It also has very little connection to the actual place. I mean, there was nothing about the place that was Australian. It was just a
yeah, it
concept.
wasn't Australian themed or
They had
kangaroo.
some. Well, they had some sculptures in the courtyard of kangaroos. So that's
Oh,
about the
okay.
extent of
So
it.
there we go. There we go. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. And then the second Google search I did, which probably is more relevant to what you're getting at with the poem, is this what's presented as maybe a joke. Um, how is a high rise like a pig farm? And so I thought maybe this was like some Midwestern joke, and came to this article about pig farming, where it's like this industrial pig farming, where it's literally like a skyscraper filled with pigs.
Oh, wow.
Is that
Wow.
what you were getting at?
It is not, but
Wow.
that is fascinating.
Yeah, and I came to this article on the South China Morning Post about how this is so wonderful, and it has photographs, which also appear to be manipulated because it's this
Oh,
industrial
wow.
pig farming, like going up in a high rise, and then in the background you can see lush greenery, which is
Oh, wow.
like there's nowhere in China that's going to be like an industrial pig farm with like lush greenery in the background. But the whole article is trying to paint it as, this is the next great thing. This is innovation. Like when I was living kind of on the outskirts of Beijing, and the local people were being encouraged to like move off of their land and into like giant, sort of Soviet style high
Oh,
rises,
yeah.
so that the land could be developed and turned into malls, and more people could fit in a
Right.
smaller amount of space. And then there's just something so dystopian about pigs and skyscrapers, and how what sort of weird,
Right.
analogy there is to humans. And
Wow. I love that whole departure. I mean, that's fascinating. I might have to write a new poem about that because that's really fascinating stuff. But in fact, none of that was actually what this joke was about. This was
Oh, wow.
this was an invented joke. I mean, I just made it up, and as you can hear it come back in the poem, it's a little harder to hear probably than to see it on the page, because the italics kind of clue you into the supposed punchline, but it's not really even a punchline. It's not at all funny.
Oh, now I
But the
see.
punchline of the
Can
joke
I read it?
is, yeah,
So in italics, the joke, how is a high rise like a pig farm? And then later on, also in italics, measured feeds, surrender of all to sky.
yeah. So not even funny, right? And it's kind of not supposed to be, but it's it's this weird. This once again was a fairly surreal moment for me, and the storm. So the storm is the thing providing this interesting link for me between where I am at this moment. I mean, in the moment of the poem, in a high-rise apartment in Beijing. But something about the storm, the experience of that storm, brought me back to this connection to. I was actually born on a pig farm in Missouri, so that's my roots, and it's my brain seeking a way of connecting those two places that seem so disparate and different, and then sort of making a lame joke out of it. Because the answer to the question, how is a high rise like a pig farm, was not nearly as ambitious or rigorous or thorough as your answer, which was Googled and actually had some like base in reality, which was quite fascinating. But this was more of just almost that mental, that associative grasping at straws that can happen at times, especially when one is like in a state of heightened emotional experience and things become really vivid, a little bit dreamlike. So, again, this kind of meditation of a pig farm, which to me is a personal, rather than a hypothetical pig farm. This was a very specific personal pig farm that I remember, and thinking of measuring out the feedings, for baby pigs, which my dad did a lot when piglets were born. If they needed help being fed, if they couldn't for some reason be fed by the mother, so measured feeds, and I'm there with a newborn, yeah, and with a newborn, especially in those first couple months, you're measuring everything. You're weighing every ounce in. Well, you're not weighing every ounce out, but you're measuring every ounce of milk that goes in, and tracking weight and every ounce that the baby gains, and it has this very interesting effect of like reducing the care of a new human into just this like tiny little tasks. But
But
then,
that's important.
yeah, it's hugely important. It's at that moment, it's everything. But then there's also the flip side of that line is the surrender of all to the sky. So there's this outside the window is this massive storm going on. So inside is this thing that can be tightly controlled and that must be tightly controlled. And then there's this whole world of what's happening in the weather and in the sky that no one can control. And you have no choice but to surrender to it.
I'm happy with my misinterpretation of your poem. I think maybe it
I
just
love
adds
that.
another layer of meaning onto it.
Sure.
Well, I want to ask a couple of questions about like all of these poems, kind of as a group. And the first is that these poems have changed since I first read them, or changed a couple times along the way. So this question is like, how do you know when a poem is finished, and what leads you to like kind of keep editing and keep tinkering?
Yeah, it's crazy making for me. I am a compulsive editor of my own work, I really struggle to know when to quit. Sometimes, every once in a while, I write a poem that I get it to a point where I'm very clear on this is done. This is what the poem needs to be, exactly like this. And then I stop. But in many other cases, that doesn't happen, or maybe I need to keep. I'm always in pursuit of that moment. I often keep tinkering because I'm hoping to arrive at that moment where I'm confident that it is done, that this is its final form. This is how it was meant to be somehow, like the old trope of chipping away at the David. Somehow knowing that the form you've revealed is exactly the form that it should be, that it's complete and perfect for that poem. But honestly, I even tinkered with a couple of these poems in between the time I sent them to you a few days ago. And then when I was practicing reading them out loud, some of them I hadn't read in quite a while, and actually one of them I've never performed or really read out loud for other people. So in the process of reading it out loud, I found things that I just felt needed to be different. So sometimes that's, sound driven, and it's the way that it sounds. It needs to just sound a little bit different. It needs to have a slightly different rhythm or consonants or assonance or whatever the case may be to make the line flow. Other times I will continually tinker with the shape, as we talked about, like the visual shape on the page. Often I have a concept of what that needs to be, but then I might come back to it a few times, tweaking it, just molding it, shaping it a bit. But I think this collection in progress is unpublished, and so I might not really consider it done until it's actually published, which I hope will be sometime in the near future. But I think there's also a little bit of that. I suppose there's some insecurity. Anything that hasn't been published and you still consider it in progress, there's a lot of temptation, or even possibly a sense of obligation, like you're supposed to keep tinkering with it, because if it hasn't been published yet and you've been sending it out, well, then it's obviously not good enough yet. So you'd better keep improving it. You'd better keep getting it, trying to get it right.
That may not be true, though. Of course.
No,
Right?
I know, absolutely, absolutely, because you can really go too far, and I've done that before. I've gone too far, where I edit past the point of improvement and start to edit into the point of deteriorating the original. Whatever spark created that poem originally, you can't mess with it too much, or you just eventually start to get. It starts to become something else, and then it's like, well, you better just stop and write a different poem then, because this poem wants to be this thing, and you can't force it to be this totally other thing.
And so then I think talking about this collection that you're hoping to publish, what I wanted to ask, kind of what binds the poems in here together. Its title, like Commuter, is the title,
Mm-hmm.
and there are maybe some like thematic connections, or could you talk about that, like why they belong together as a collection?
Yeah, for sure. These So all of these poems came out of the basically the 3 years of time that I was living in Beijing. And in a sense, it's the most defined group of poems I've ever written. Perhaps that's why it felt easy for me to clearly define the boundaries and think of them as a collection, because the the years I was living in Beijing were so separate. What I was doing was quite different, and the life I was living was quite different than what I was doing immediately before. and then what I was doing immediately after when we left Beijing and moved back to my home state of most of my life, which is Colorado. So there was that really clear delineation of like, this was a super distinct era of my life. And the Commuter title works on, is serving a couple different purposes. Really, literally, a lot of these poems were written either during or immediately following my daily commute to work that I was talking about, when I would spend a couple hours every day on the subway, or at times I would use a Didi or taxi service instead to commute. But there was this concept of like passing through, like what a commuter is, right? And I felt like that served my purposes on a couple different levels of, like, in the city, I was a commuter, passing through the city every day, from one side to the other and back again. There, to me, was an interesting, like a useful metaphor, actually relating to translation. That the literal meaning of translation being like to carry a cross. And I was dealing with language, obviously, living surrounded by a language that I mostly did not understand. I was not lucky enough to be like a person who came to Beijing having studied Mandarin. Life circumstances were just such that my husband decided to take a job there. We had a 2-year-old daughter. We just decided to go for this opportunity, and there we were. I landed knowing hardly more than ni hao. And when you're in that experience, I was obsessed with language. So the kind of metaphor of translation slash commuting or communicability was on my mind a lot. Even more so because I was in public transportation, just surrounded all day, or well, much of the day, by a language that I didn't understand. And so anyway, sorry, there's the language element. So that's a huge player in this whole collection, is the unintelligibility of language to me. And as a poet, I'm a very linguistically driven person. I mean, I'm a linguistically driven person anyway. I've studied a lot of languages. I've had the experience before of living in other countries, both where I didn't speak the language and also where I did speak the language. And but anyway, so I was very preoccupied all the time by language and what was happening in my own brain when encountering linguistic structures that I didn't understand or that I partially understood. So you see in these poems, there's a lot of disorientation. There's a lot of language that doesn't quite make sense, kind of shifting phrases or errors almost, that in some of the poems there are lines or phrases that are like mistakes and that repeat within the same line or the next line, like a correction of sorts. So that was one of the things that pulled the collection together as well. And then is the layer of motherhood, parenthood, pregnancy, the concept, again, kind of a metaphor of all of us being commuters, so to speak, in this world and in life, just passing through, and how one can pass through a place without necessarily belonging to that place. So one can be an outsider, and so that's a theme that definitely comes into many of these poems, is a sense of displacement and alienation. And it's a really very intensely personal group of poems for me, and totally autobiographical, but through this filter of disorientation, displacement. Not to get too personal, but like the experience of pregnancy and childbirth for me was extremely alienating. I felt like an outsider in my own body much of the time, and almost didn't recognize myself, not only my body but my own thoughts, and so there was just this incredible overlay of these experiences, these elements kind of all happening at the same time for me in Beijing. And I'll also add, this isn't so much related to the title Commuter. Well, it is kind of tangentially, but the one thing that's maybe interesting to note is that there is a constraint here at work holding all of these poems together, which is that almost every title, I think there's only one exception, no, there's two exceptions to that, but almost every title in the collection are phrases that I saw on fashion, like on coats, bags, shirts, and so on in Beijing. So, there's this kind of trend of using English words and phrases as a fashion statement. And people often kind of like to poke fun. I mean, English speakers sometimes poke fun at them and like call that kind of use of English like Chinglish, right? Where it's not quite correct. I mean, it's not like proper English, but I definitely wasn't poking fun at it at all. In fact, I loved living among and traveling among this use of language every day. I found it to be incredibly inspiring. It's almost like accidental poetry. So it's not a pejorative use of it at all. It's just like, I think there's like an aleatory component to it, which is some like, I've always really been drawn to poetry that makes use of some kind of element of chance or randomness. And then almost in a way that could be considered like divination or like a mystical element to it, but like sometimes things just fit that you wouldn't expect to fit. You find these surprises, or you find meaning that is like a surprise meaning. And
I love that element of poetry. Yeah.
Yeah, right. It's an element of poetry, period. But for me, it was just very productive to encounter these uses of language that were just slightly off to one side, and would just prompt a different way of thinking or a different way of approaching a concept or a phrase. And so they're kind of labels, and throughout the collection, like some of them are applied in ways that are kind of cute or a little bit jokey. And then some of them I think are, to me anyway, feel really sincere and kind of profound. Like the one I'm actually looking at, I have a t-shirt hung up on my wall right in front of me that says, "We on an ultralight beam, this is a God dream." And I bought that T-shirt in China. That phrase, "This is a God dream," became the title of actually two different poems in the collection. So that one I was like really drawn to. It seems loaded with meaning, even though it's not quite a phrase that I think most English speakers would organically produce.
Right.
So
Yeah, I was wondering about the title of that one. That's fascinating. Well, I think we should wrap up here, and I really hope to see this collection of poems published. It should be published.
thank you.
Yeah, and I do want a copy once it's out.
I appreciate that. I'm hopeful. I really believe in this collection. I really, really do, and that's why I'm still working at it this many years later. The fact that I have two children and I've done a lot of relocating and starting over with my career in the interim from when I wrote these poems to now, my life has been very, very full. So I haven't been able to dedicate my attention fully to trying to get this baby out into the world. But I am still trying. And I guess you can ask me like a year from now if I'm still trying and I haven't had success after actively sending it out to small presses and things like that, then I might reconsider. But at this moment, I believe in the baby. I want the
Yeah,
baby to be
yeah.
born.
No, the poems are wonderful. Publication is like its own can of
Oh my
worms.
gosh,
Yeah,
it's very fraught. Yeah,
yeah.
but thank you.
All right. Thank you so much for talking to me.
Yeah, thanks, Deva. I really appreciate the time and the questions and everything. This has been a pleasure.
The Fearless Reader podcast is a creation of the Spittoon Arts Collective, a 100% volunteer-run organization. Music is courtesy of Macondo. One quick clarification, Jennifer Fossenbell realized that her memories of the pig farm are actually more pieced together from family photographs and stories rather than being like clearly remembered. She was too little. But I think we all experience this, so it's not like, a fake or invented memoir. But still, for a writer such as Fossenbell, these points of accuracy matter. Okay, until next time.